wanted to know why it was that Ken Warriner, named in the police report, was able to de-stock Newcastle Waters, apparently against the wishes of senior departmental staff. Ken Warriner is a high-profile Territory figure, well known in the Territory for his role in the cattle industry. With details of the allegations against Mr Warriner, here's Dennis Driver.
Well, today the opposition, true to their word, came up with another name from that confidential police report of 1984. Ken Warriner, Kerry Packer's manager of Newcastle Waters, was identified as Mr A. The Packer property is among the largest cattle stations in the Territory. Warriner's involvement with Newcastle Waters, though, goes back to a time before it was purchased by Consolidated Press. Warriner was a director of Ashburton Pastoral Company, which took over Newcastle Waters in 1980. It's probably worth noting that a fellow director of Ashburton Pastoral Company, Peter Baillieu, was also a director of Consolidated Press, which may or may not have some bearing on the later purchase of Newcastle Waters by Packer. Warriner is a well-known Territory personality. Last year, at the commencement of the last great cattle drive, he opened a pioneer park near Newcastle Waters. But during his time in the Territory, he's done more than open a monument. Ken Warriner could be said to be an influential figure in the cattle industry in the Territory. He's currently chairman of the Katherine branch of the Cattlemen's Association. He's on the executive of the Tennant Creek branch. And he's also on the all-important executive of the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association, which is the sole voice for cattlemen in the Territory. That organisation, by the way, doesn't favour a judicial inquiry into the allegations surrounding Btec. Ken Warriner is also a director of Territory Television, the operators of Darwin's commercial TV channel. So what's he done that warrants naming in Parliament? Well, according to Brian Eade, he's Mr A, the man identified last week in Parliament as having ripped off Btec. According to Mr Eade, Warriner has had connections and still has connections with senior people in the government. Warriner, he said, has been appointed to a government committee responsible for making recommendations with respect to Btec policy and compensation rates. On Warriner's suggestion, he said, Newcastle Waters was used to test the Btec destocking program. This, he said, was against the advice of senior staff and resulted in a blowout of the Btec budget of more than $750,000. Original estimates had calculated payments to Newcastle Waters of $420,000 over 2 years. Instead, they received $1.2 million. Eade claims Warriner also formed his own transport company and contracted for the destocking of Newcastle Waters. Doing so, he overcharged Btec by more than $50,000. A year after the overcharge, after information had been passed to the Federal Police, but before the Territory Police could commence their own inquiry, Warriner repaid some of the money and blamed his bookkeeper for the error. The bookkeeper, though, said Warriner was aware of the overcharge all along. Warriner has also been accused of shifting cattle from a second cattle property onto Newcastle Waters so he could claim compensation not normally due. Again, some of the money was repaid. Well, when Kerry Packer's Consolidated Press took over Newcastle Waters in 1983, Ken Warriner was retained as manager, and he still holds that position. Today, he couldn't be contacted for comment on the allegations. Today's revelations have increased the pressure on the government for an inquiry, but so far they haven't shown any signs that they'll alter their position. When questioned today as why Warriner was able to destock Newcastle Waters despite opposition from departmental staff, Primary Industries Minister Mike Reid said he had no knowledge of the matter. No knowledge. Mr Reid mustn't have read his government's own police report. It's all spelled out in it. Last week in the Parliament, it was abattoir operator Donald Hoare who was accused of ripping off Btec by underweighing cattle. Today, Ken Warriner. Tomorrow, if the government doesn't agree to an inquiry, it's likely the opposition will table the report itself.
Dennis Driver, and certainly more to come on Btec before this parliamentary session is over. The row over the dumping of John Howard and the ascension of Andrew Peacock to the Liberal leadership Karen claims to have new evidence supporting allegations of rip-offs in the Btec program. Mr Karen says investigations conducted by his department, independent of those conducted by the Territory, have revealed that new witnesses are now prepared to give evidence to a judicial inquiry. It's the sort of ammunition that the opposition spokesman Brian Eade has been after. And in a moment I'll be talking to him and the Minister Mike Reid about the latest development. But first, this report from Dennis Driver.
Well, if John Karen had really tried, he couldn't have timed this afternoon's call for an inquiry any better. On the last day of the parliamentary sittings, and when the opposition was wondering where it would turn next, the announcement by the Federal Minister that his department had conducted its own investigation and turned up witnesses prepared to give evidence in court supporting the allegations contained in the police reports of 1984. These are the reports that the government has been claiming lacked sufficient evidence to lead to a prosecution of those named. In a statement this afternoon, Mr Karen said that his concern about Btec in the Territory went back as far as 1982, and that the outcome of the police investigations in 1984 was still cause for concern. It was during his recent trip to the Territory that he was approached by a number of people with serious allegations and claiming to have documentary evidence. He said he then wrote to the Chief Minister, Marshal Perrin, but the response did not allay his concerns. This flies in the face of claims by the Chief Minister that the federal government had given the Territory a clean bill of health on its handling of Btec. A big part of the government's argument against the need for a judicial inquiry has been based on the alleged support from Canberra. Mr Karen this afternoon stressed that the claims of support by the Territory were not true. He said letters which the Territory government claimed supported its handling of Btec should give them no joy at all, and that reviews by consultants did not examine issues that were the subject of the allegations of 1984. It seems the Territory government has been pushed out on a limb by Mr Karen. Today he wrote to the Chief Minister revealing that his department had conducted its own investigation and that as a result of separate allegations and interviews there was now a number of individuals prepared to give evidence in court. Consequently, he's asked the Chief Minister to reassess his position on a judicial inquiry. Well, is John Karen playing politics? Is he simply supporting his Labor colleagues in the Territory? Well, it's doubtful. Karen is a competent operator and unlikely to stick out his neck claiming to have fresh evidence unless that clearly is the case. He'll surely be called upon to reveal his evidence if he hasn't already in today's letter to the Chief Minister. If he fails to deliver, given his statement this afternoon, his credibility would be take more than a dive. So, will it be enough to force the government to change its mind on a judicial inquiry? Well, obviously it'll take them some time to examine the new evidence. If they can continue to tough it out, no doubt they will. But the whole issue has taken on another dimension with the involvement of the Federal Minister. His call for an inquiry has blown away a big part of the government's position. And John Karen holds the ace hand. The money. In 1983, the feds withheld Btec funds when the mismanagement of the scheme was at its worst. And they can surely do it again. There's no mistaking John Karen's position now. And with the possible threat of no money, the Territory government might just buckle. Or if cattlemen, faced with destocking, have the flow of funds stopped, it could be the cowboys and not the Aborigines surrounding the Chan building.
Dennis Driver. Well, Minister Mike Reid, has the Commonwealth shoved you against the wall alone on this one?
Virginia, poor Dennis just can't get the facts right. The Federal Minister has not called for a judicial inquiry. He has said that he would support an inquiry, and naturally you would expect him to do so. He indicated a few weeks ago that he would cooperate. Just look at the facts in relation to the context of what has happened over the last couple of weeks, or the last month or so indeed, with Brian Eade and the ALP in the Territory, culminating today in a question in the Parliament in Canberra from the Federal member Warren Snowden asking a question of the Federal Minister. What would you expect the Federal Minister to do but to support his ALP colleagues and to take a parliamentary stand? But notwithstanding that...
Nevertheless, they have thrown the Commonwealth's thrown its weight behind the call
yes, well,
for
if you listen, Virginia,
inquiry.
notwithstanding that, the Federal Minister has sent to the Northern Territory government today some information which it has collected.
Are you aware of what's in the letter that's been sent to Mr. Perrin?
Oh yes, naturally I am.
Can you tell us what is involved in that letter?
I can tell you that the Federal Minister did not call for an inquiry, but he has asked us, in the light of the information that he has provided today, to consider the position in relation to that information.
And for
that
a
information that was
reassessment.
provided today was, within a couple of hours, provided to the Police Commissioner to undertake a full inquiry, and I've got no doubt that that will be undertaken with the greatest scrutiny and the greatest conviction by the Police Commissioner.
OK, let's go through a few of the things he said in the letter. He has said that you've said that the Commonwealth has given a clean bill of health to your handling of Btec. Now, according to what he said in this letter, that's nonsense. They haven't at all.
Well, certainly, Virginia, they never indicated that before. What you've got to look at, Virginia, is the content of the letter that the Minister sent to the Northern Territory Government, not the politics of what is in his media release. Might I just say also that yesterday in the Assembly here in the Territory, we saw Brian Eade very dramatically table a couple of stat decks in relation to evidence that he claimed to have collected.
Now, were they matters for the police?
That information was not made available to me before the dramatic tabling, apart from the fact that it was indicated that they were available in a shoddy little note that the Honourable Member sent across the Assembly.
Mr Reid, now that that stat deck has been tabled, saying that by Rod Dunbar saying a stock inspector tried to do an illicit deal with him, now, is that a matter for the police that you'll be furthering?
Well, if you hadn't interrupted, you'd already have the answer, Virginia. Those two stat decks are in the hands of the Police Commissioner. I passed them on to him today, and I indicated over the last 6 weeks that if Brian Eade had information in relation to the allegations that he has made, information that could support them, he had the right as a Member of Parliament to provide that information to me or the police. As I indicated then, it would be passed on directly to the Police Commissioner, and that is exactly what has happened with those reports. And in addition to that, of course, as I've indicated, the information that has been passed on by the Federal Minister today.
Mr Reid, Mr Kerrin, Federal Minister, has accused you of diversionary tactics in your defence of Btec. Now, that's no small claim, surely.
Well, Mr Kerrin is playing the politics in his media release. Mr Kerrin, I think, has spelled out the concerns that he has as the Federal Minister in his letter to the Northern Territory Government, and the politics of it doesn't come out in the media release.
But do you admit they're serious concerns?
You have to take what Mr Kerrin has said in the letter, and he has asked us simply to reassess the position in the light of the additional information he has provided. That has already been passed today to the police.
Right, over to you, Mr Eade. Does Mr Kerrin's statement today vindicate your stance?
Well, certainly we had the Minister he had 3 props that he was relying on. One was pastoralists, and more of them are now saying they want an inquiry. The buffalo producers, and more than half of them now have come down on our side as far as needing an inquiry. And the last one he had really was his claimed support from the federal government for his position. Now, they've quite clearly said that they never supported his position, and that, in fact, what he was saying in the Parliament was quite wrong.
Were you aware that the Federal Minister was carrying out his own investigation?
No, there were rumours around, but in fact they were denied by the Minister when we brought them up in Parliament some time ago, and he said that no, that it was all quite wrong.
A cynic might say that the timing of Mr Kerrin's statement was rather shrewd.
I think what may have happened is that, and I hope this is the case, that John Kerrin was waiting to see the result of what we did in Parliament yesterday, and he was hoping that the Northern Territory would move on its own problems and sort out those problems, and that when we failed to do it, he then went to the Territory Government and said, well, look, you know, you really have got to get into this, because everybody knows this stuff's around.
So it has been timed to boost along your campaign?
No, I think it's timed to try and get the industry cleaned up. He knows as well as everybody else that the Northern Territory needs to get its act together as far as Btec. It needs to clean it up and get the pastoral industry back on the rails. He wants that.
What do you know about the evidence that Mr Kerrin has put forth to Mr Perrin?
No, I don't. I don't know what it is. I can make some guesses, because there are lots of other areas that I haven't raised as yet that I haven't been able to tie up, and I would presume that some of them are the same ones that he's got onto.
Why do you think it is, though, that Mr Kerrin has taken this long? I mean, you've been working on Btec for several months. Why has it taken this long for him to go public, put out a statement saying that he doesn't support the Territory Government's handling of Btec?
What he said before was that he supported an inquiry. He told us that before. That the difficulty is that there's been a real problem. I mean, since 1983, there's been 5 ministers in charge of this portfolio, and the thing has degenerated into a complete shambles, and I feel sorry for Mike Reid. He had to pick it up after it had been virtually destroyed by the Chief Minister, who was the previous minister, and he's had to try and come to grips with it, and unfortunately, he hasn't done it very well.
Given the strong wording in Mr Keren's statement, he's talked about diversionary tactics and grave concerns. Now, given that sort of strength, where do we go from here? Where does the opposition go from here? Are you going to rest back and allow the Commonwealth to take over the running on this campaign?
No way in the world. I still hope that the Northern Territory government, and they can do it tonight in the Parliament, can move suspension of standing orders and set up an inquiry. That is the best way that we can go on this one, because the Minister is very strong in his press statement. He's very angry, understandably, that the letters and the things that he has sent in confidence to this Minister have been used, selectively quoted from, and used to portray him in a position that he never held.
OK, thanks, Mr Reid. Back to you, Mr Reid, for right of reply. Well, tonight is the last night of the sitting. Can we get an inquiry?
Virginia, the evidence that has been put forward, in fact, I should correct that, it's allegations that have been put forward today, have been put in the right place for investigation with the Police Commissioner. Can I just correct you? The Honourable John Keren has not indicated that he doesn't support the Territory at this stage in relation to the Btec program. He has asked some questions. As regards Brian Eade's statements, today in the halls of the Assembly, he did say, to pass the comment to people, that he was disappointed, and it was clear that he didn't get support from John Keren to call for a judicial inquiry. All John Keren has said that he would support an inquiry, that he would cooperate with it. Naturally, he would do that, and naturally he would support his political allies. And that is exactly what he's done with his press release in relation to what the ALP and the Territory has been doing for the last month, and indeed what Warren Snowden did in asking a question on this matter today in the Canberra, in the House of Parliament.
Mr Keren says he's got people prepared to go before a court. So why still hold out against an inquiry?
Well, Virginia, I've told you, we're not holding out. The matter is with the police. They will be investigating. I'd imagine they probably start tomorrow. It will be fully investigated. No one is holding out. And if anyone has got any evidence, I've got no doubt in my mind that the police will take every opportunity to ensure that if it can be validated, that it will be heard in court. And there's no question about that.
Over to you, Mr Reid. Right of reply. Holding out on an inquiry or police investigation?
Well, I've tabled in Parliament a lot of evidence. I've notified the Minister over the last couple of months of 10 different cases where I've got allegations that range from alleged criminality through rorts, through bad administration and just bad practice. Now, the lawyer that I took in with me to see the police said it all. He said, there is no way in the world we're going to get to the bottom of this without having a judicial inquiry. That's the only way that we're going to clean up the industry and get it in some sort of shape so that it can get to 1992, which is where we've got to be with Btec, and get beyond that with some credibility here in the Territory and around Australia.
OK, we'll leave it there. I thank you both gentlemen very much for coming in tonight. Last week we screened a story showing the efforts of relief organisations in southern Sudan to help refugees have revealed that Btec compensation paid to the station's prior owner, Ken Warriner, was nearly $750,000 above what was planned. At the time of destocking, the maximum compensation payment was $30 per head. But for Newcastle Waters, that maximum was waived, and rather than $420,000 in compensation, Newcastle Waters was paid $1.2 million. Here's Dennis Driver.
500 at 510, can't see for the dust. 510, 15, 20, 520 done. 520 is Metro.
Cattlemen in Central Australia are enjoying one of the best seasons for many years. Earlier good rains have brought an abundance of good feed, and the cattle are testimony to the better side of Mother Nature. The quality of the cattle being sold here are as good as will be found anywhere. But the fat and healthy beasts don't unfortunately reflect the present state of the Territory's cattle industry, nor the mood of many of its leading cattlemen. The 1992 Btec deadline is looming, and pastoralists faced with massive destocks of their herds are growing anxious. Their anxiety is compounded and their mood made more volatile by the continuing allegations surrounding the scheme they were told would guarantee them a future. the controversy of the 1984 police inquiry, and now another police investigation into the Btec operations following allegations in Parliament have failed to quell their disquiet. Calls for a judicial inquiry to later arrest the allegations once and for all have so far fallen on deaf ears. And it seems every day the government stalls, there's something new. This time, documents from the Australian Bureau of Animal Health. Obtained under Freedom of Information legislation, they detail how a plan to destock Newcastle Water Station was changed at the last minute, much to the advantage of station owner at the time, and now manager for Kerry Packer, Ken Warriner.
Thank you very much.
Warriner was named in Parliament by Brian Eade as being investigated in the 1984 police reports. Eade alleged that Warriner had overcharged Btec thousands of dollars for cartage of cattle and had made incorrect claims for compensation by misclassifying cattle. Warriner blamed his bookkeeper and later repaid the money. The bookkeeper, though, tells a different story. In 1982, Newcastle Waters, owned then by Ashburton Pastoral Company, of which Warriner was a shareholder and director, entered into a destocking agreement with Btec.